Hello, welcome to What If scenarios for the Battle of Taranto on the night of 11th 12th November 1940. It's going to be a series of made up scenarios I've come up with, exploiting either hindsight or things happening differently to explore what might have been. And I'm Dan Friedman. I hope you enjoy. Bit of background, I'll keep this one brief. There's going to be lots of other things going on about the Battle of Taranto for you to pay attention to and learn about. But essentially, it was an attack by 20 Fairey Swordfish Mark I aircraft. They were launched from HMS Illustrious at a range of about 170 miles, which rather limited the amount they could carry, although they did manage to carry torpedoes and quite a lot of bombs and a lot of fuel. They managed to severely damage two Regia Marina battleships to the point that they took months to get back into service, and one never returned to service until the Italians left the Axis. Two seaplanes were destroyed. There was some minor damage done to a couple of destroyers and a heavy cruiser, and minor damage was done to some onshore fuel tanks. This was all done for the loss of two aircraft, and two of those crew were killed. On the night of the attack, there were 6 battleships, 7 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, and quite a lot of destroyers, roughly, in Taranto harbour. It was the main base of the Italian Navy, the Regia Marina. Yeah, that's it was a big attack. Italian casualties were 59 killed and about 600 wounded. So, first what if? What if HMS Eagle had joined the party? So, this had been part of the original plan, but Eagle suffered damage to her aviation fuel systems and needed to be in repair from the 6th to the 16th of November at Alexandria, and so was unable to make it for the party, because the original plan had been to use 36 swordfish rather than the 21 that took off, because they were available, only 20 of which actually made it to the attack. It doesn't seem entirely clear at what point the damage was done to HMS Eagle. It could have been as much as a month before it was actually identified and to then be dealt with. So the point of divergence would probably just be the damages noticed earlier and addressed in time for her to join Illustrious for the sortie. So what are the immediate effects? 3 waves of aircraft go off, which is so totaling 36. At least half of these would be armed with torpedoes, so 6 in each wave, which is about what they did in real life. So working that through proportionally, if the real life 11 torpedo armed aircraft achieved 5 hits on 3 battleships, then by my calculations you'd get 8 significantly damaging hits across 4 to 5 of the battleships that the Italians had there. You've also probably got a better chance of doing some more significant damage to the oil storage ashore from the bombs used. Unfortunately, the bombs where they did hit, and there were probably about 4 bombs that hit ships, cruisers and destroyers, none of them seem to have exploded properly. So I'm not sure we'd have seen a great deal more damage of the sort that would take a ship out of service, but equally having an unexploded bomb on your ship tends to make people a little bit unhappy about going to sea with it there if they know about it. So later effects, with the Italian fleet more likely to be properly knocked out as a threat to Royal Navy operations, you're going to see some changes. Now, worth bearing in mind, within a week of this happening, the Italian battleships that had not been hit, Vittorio Veneto and Giulio Cesare, sortied from their new base which was now at Naples, and successfully disrupted Operation White, which was a club-run attack, sorry, not attack, resupply operation trying to get more aircraft to Malta. They successfully managed to disrupt that. So, but if there's not really any battleships left to the Italian Navy, then suddenly you can move around the significant numbers of capital ships that were employed blocking them up and countering them. So they're up to about 6 of the major capital ships were kept in the Mediterranean. And if you don't need all of them there, then HMS Hood would hopefully go and get her much needed refit, so she wouldn't be being blown up by Bismarck, hopefully. And both Barham and Malaya had not been upgraded to the same extent as Queen Elizabeth, Valiant, and Warspite. So again, they might be sent off to get upgraded. So, scenario 2. What if the Ark Royal had followed up and struck Naples on the 13th, 14th of November? So Ark Royal had, in the real world, got back to Gibraltar by 9:30 in the morning on the day of the attack, having done her bit for the bigger, wider Operation MB8. And she didn't leave Gibraltar again until the morning of the 15th, which was for this Operation White, which the Italian battleships I mentioned had disrupted. So instead, if either the force with Ark Royal and Ark Royal herself either deployed from Gibraltar pretty much as soon as they got back and taken on some fuel, or in fact never actually went back to Gibraltar and stayed in the ocean, kind of at sea, they could mount an attack on the Italian fleet that on the 12th, so the morning after the attack, all moved to Naples. They could sit there and strike Naples. So although Ark Royal had kind of donated a few swordfish, which had flown via Malta and some other bits and pieces to Illustrious to try and make good some of the losses, she probably could have still put together a force of about 30 swordfish with 12 skewers that could do a dive bombing role and take on this kind of bombing and flare dropping role. And she also had a 12 Fulmars. So the skewers would mean that you could send 30 swordfish with torpedoes against Naples. Now, assuming the effectiveness of the torpedo attacks is about the same, 30 swordfish would make for about 13 or 14 torpedo hits. Assuming these go in waves of no more than about 10 or 12, we're probably looking at 3 waves going in, and if the battleships are clearly sinking by the time the second and the third waves are going in, then they're more likely to turn and offer to donate their nice lumps of high explosive filled steel to some of Italy's heavy cruisers that would probably not appreciate the attention. And I wonder if this might actually be an even more devastating outcome than what would happen if the Eagle had joined Ark Royal. The other key thing with this is you then have the Italians having to wonder where is safe to put their ships. Now, the last key place they might have is Genoa, up in further north in Italy, which was also the site of the only dry dock that could accommodate the Littorio class battleships, and they only had one of those. So you might see a San Lazar type raid on that, or just frankly bomb the ships when they're in there with Wellingtons and things. And if Quite a lot of Genoa gets flattened. I believe Plymouth was actually quite a nice, pretty city before World War II happened. It's what happens when you're a major naval base, I guess. It's not pretty, it's not nice, but it's the reality. So you may have the Italian heavy units retreated, pulled all the way back there by the, should we say, the political appointed commanders that I think we can be fairly unpleasant about without really worrying we're going to offend anyone. The Italians up to probably ship command level at the very least were very able, very capable, and let down by circumstances beyond their control. Poor quality of munitions, poor quality senior leadership, poor quality logistics, some interesting compromises in ship design, possibly. But bravery, skill, superb. Look at what they managed to do to Valiant and Queen Elizabeth, with even fewer men risked than happened at Taranto. So, yeah, what good the bombs will do. I don't know what was wrong with the 250-pound armor-piercing bombs, but something clearly wasn't going right. Well, never mind. So, next scenario. What if Admiral Cunningham, ABC, as he's generally known, and let's face it, that fits more neatly into my slide, had played nicer with the RAF? Well, there had apparently, and it's a struggle to find these things without going out and spending a lot of money on books, and I don't really have time to do that. What if an RAF kind of diversionary or preliminary raid had occurred at Taranto on the night of the 11th? It apparently was actually suggested, and probably would have gone in about 8:30, 9:15 in the evening. You'd then have a period for things to settle, for people to relax a bit or get on with the damage control before the swordfish arrive at about 11 o'clock at night. Now, the timing of the swordfish attacks was carefully done because the aircraft carrier and her group were at about the extreme of where they were comfortable being and knew that they would need to pull back further out of range of Italian aircraft before dawn so as to minimize the risk to them and maximize the amount of ocean that the Italians would have to search. So the swordfish attack was kind of fixed as a time, but the RAF could and did have Wellington bombers around which could do this sort of thing. I believe 10 were involved in the attack on the 13th of November, but if they could have gone in and hit as a sort of preliminary or zero wave, I don't know what to call it, that might have been quite interesting. Now, rather than say what would have happened, I'm actually going to explain why this couldn't happen, because it makes so much sense on paper and in theory. But the original plan had been for the attack on Taranto to happen on the 21st of October, Trafalgar Night, to be another big momentous occasion. But there was a fire on Illustrious, which was dealt with, and dealt with very well. It was in the hangar, which is not a good place to have your petrol and things burning when your aircraft are mostly fairy swordfish, which are made of wooden canvas, and the canvas has been doped with even more flammable things than canvas might be. So that had been postponed. That had been the cause of that. They needed moonlight. The reason for the moonlight was in case the flares, which were used to illuminate the targets by dropping them kind of behind the battleships so that they were highlighted and also happened to keep the bombers, the swordfish, kind of well out of view. in case that wasn't enough, they wanted a bright enough moon, and the next moon after the 21st of October wasn't until the period the 11th to 19th of November. So they went on the first night that they could, and in fact had planned on going back, or thought about going back, on the night of the 12th, 13th, but bad weather certainly caused that to be called off. But yeah, that's a different thing. Between the 21st or the 18th of October and the 11th of November, a lot happened. So the Italians invaded Greece, minor thing. They found the damage to the Eagle and had to fix that because she had the same sort of highly explosive aviation fuel in use then, which was basically high octane petrol like you put in your car. All those things about petrol tanks exploding, I mean, it doesn't really happen in our cars, but could happen. This was not the kind of really heavy jet fuel we use now, which is kind of mostly tar and you can put out matches in. So Eagle's damage needed to be fixed. And certainly by the time this came around, there was a plan to work in a very complicated collection of different operations, which all went under the heading of MB8 and involved about 5 different component operations involving the Navy, with bits of British Army being moved to Greece to help them, or at least towards Greece, things going to Malta, which included Army and RAF, ground units and things. Plus the RAF were having their aircraft transported to Malta from Britain. And the RAF were involved quite heavily in reconnaissance generally, and also specifically of Taranto from Malta. So there was a good working relationship. But Bomber Command could be a bit difficult at times to work with, although it's not at this stage under the Britain's answer to Admiral King, that is Bomber Harris. So I'm prepared to forgive and forget. So what if Courageous and or Glorious had not been lost and had actually been available for use? So to run through these, Courageous had been lost on the 17th of September 1939, Glorious on the 8th of June 1940. I'll run through both of these, but essentially if you have more carriers available, and bearing in mind the Royal Navy has a literal handful of carriers and has had to press into service HMS Argus that they had taken out of commission as an aircraft carrier in 1938 when Ark Royal came online, because she was too slow at about 20 knots and could not carry many aircraft. She was pressed quite hard into service. So, you know, things weren't great. If you'd had these two beauties, which are kind of Britain's answer to the Lexington and Lexington's sister, whose name escapes me, and the Japanese converted battleships and battle cruisers into carriers as well. Can't remember them either. Oh well. So Ark Royal. So with Courageous, she was torpedoed by a U-boat, U-29, who fired 3 torpedoes. Now, only a couple of days before that, Ark Royal had very nearly been torpedoed, and we know how badly she reacted to being hit by a single torpedo in the Mediterranean later. There's a reason we ended up with 2 Ark Royals during this period. But with Courageous, so with what had happened with Ark Royal was that the Germans had similar problems to the Americans in terms of the exploders or detonation mechanisms not working on their torpedoes. And this is what happened with Ark Royal, and so the torpedoes were fired. and they exploded prematurely, which actually gave away the location of the U-boat, which was then sunk, although all of the crew managed to get off, which is something at least. So Ark Royal had just been very nearly torpedoed in pretty much exactly the same circumstances Courageous now found herself in. This is whilst they were doing this kind of hunter-killer hunting groups, trying to aggressively find the U-boats without the benefits of the things that actually made this work, like surface search radars and air search radars and more escorts and everything like that. So instead, the fleet carriers had been put to this use, which was, and I hope you can see the capitals when I say this, not a good thing. However, the captain of the U-boat that sank Courageous, which was U-29, I believe, had already experienced problems on this patrol, which was the first patrol of the war, with his torpedo detonators. So he had sunk 3 ships previously, and they were merchant ships, but he appears to have done the decent thing and let the crews get off first, and then tried to signal to get help for them afterwards. And on at least one occasion, when he had fired or launched a pair of torpedoes, they had exploded prematurely. But because he wasn't facing a warship, he took his time and he sank the ship with gunfire. And had then, I think, tried using the torpedoes on another ship to try and sink her, and I assume had used the contact detonators, which had then worked. But unfortunately, he was smart enough to realize there might be something wrong with the torpedoes if he used the magnetic trigger that was supposed to be the better way of working, because that will break the back of a ship rather than just blowing a hole in the side where you may well have torpedo protection systems. So very easily, Courageous might have not been there if Ark Royal, if the lesson had been learnt, or if the U-boat had not been lucky with their torpedoes not going wrong, or not going wrong in that way, or whatever, because even with the contact detonators, the Germans also experienced problems with their torpedoes running at the wrong depths, which was due to some sort of failure somewhere else in the kind of production, maintenance, checking process, which I did read about and don't entirely understand. HMS Glorious. I mean, it's hard to justify how Glorious was sunk by Scharnhorst and Gneisenau. And this has gone up to the point of being a question in Parliament, not only at the time, but also within the last 25 years or so, because it's just such a this doesn't add up situation. So what had happened, or what were the points where we could avoid this? I really don't understand why Glorious was allowed to go on her own. And when I say I mean the wider naval world. The rationale for the ship being allowed to set off pretty much on her own, she had 2 destroyers for escort, was, well, it was claimed it was to do with fuel, which strikes me as being fairly nonsensical. But the crucial thing seems to have been that the ship's captain, Captain Doyley Hughes, appears to have really not got on with a lot of his subordinates. He'd been a submariner in the First World War, been successful, decorated, but had limited experience with carriers. Had been XO on an aircraft carrier for a few months, I think, before getting command of Glorious. And unfortunately, he had apparently taught himself how to fly, and rumour has it, or the stories are, that he thought he knew better than any of his actual aviation specialists on the ship, and kept on overruling them, disagreeing with them, etc. And he was in the process of court-martialing the commander of his air group, and I think their second in command. The second in command went down with the ship, as did the captain. The commander air survived and went on to have a perfectly successful career. He was exonerated at this court-martial, but that seems to have been the reason. And it's all very odd, because what had happened was that they were in the process of evacuating Norway. A convoy had departed on the morning of the 7th of June, which was a slow convoy, and that had headed off. And over the course of the 7th of June, Glorious and Ark Royal, because she was there as well, had been landing on aircraft to bring them back, because actually from North Norway back to the UK is a lot further than the single-seat fighters like a Hurricane can fly, or certainly comfortably fly. But she departed at about 3 in the morning, and Ark Royal and the remaining transports, together with their escorts and everything, left at about 9 o'clock. So she was only about 6 hours ahead of the rest of the force, and she really wasn't going very quickly. She was steaming at 16, 17 knots. Her cruising speed seems to have been sort of about that, but she's in a war zone. She's capable of nearly 30 knots. If you crank the boilers, you could probably get even more than that if you do the kind of Scotty, give me 120% type thing. I won't try and do a Scottish accent for now. Yeah, so that's all a bit dodge. And there was a big intelligence failure. Basically, they should have known the Germans were there at some point before they did. So signals traffic analysis, which was still a fairly new thing, is apparently part of the excuse, had actually detected that the German surface force had sortied several days before all of this happened. But the Admiralty apparently did not pass this on to the commanders at sea. So that would have been point one, where people in aircraft carriers might have gone, maybe the seas aren't quite as friendly as they might be. Then, on the morning of the 8th, between 5:30 in the morning and 7 in the morning, very sadly, HM armed trawler Juniper was escorting an oil tanker, and were engaged by Hipper and Gneisenau. And Juniper somehow managed to take on this force and kind of keep them at bay for an hour and a half before being sunk. But, sadly, neither Juniper nor the ship she was escorting managed to get off a contact report to say, big ships are here and doing nasty things to me. Help! Which would have, given plenty of notice, because this was quite some distance from where Glorious was, and Glorious would have had plenty of time to speed up and turn away and get home in time, or turn back and attack, but she was chock full of RAF Hurricanes rather than anything to take on significant big ships. The last thing that really seems fairly unforgivable is there was no sort of combat air patrol or anything else up around Courageous. So standard operating procedure would have been to have at least one aircraft aloft, just circling over the ships as a lookout, and that would have had a range of about 40 miles, so 60-something kilometers. And from what I could tell from the kind of different reports, the German forces, Gneisenau and Scharnhorst, spotted Courageous at a range of about 27 kilometers, and then opened fire a bit later, but it was something like that. So that would have given Courageous time. had she been clued up to this, rather than it being, oh, there's 4 o'clock in the art. So Germans spotted them at about 3:45. 4 o'clock, somebody on Courageous goes, oh, there's smoke on the horizon. And it's not until 4:20 that one of the destroyers gets close enough to go, oh, they're shooting at me. And B, anyone thinks to do things like get the ship closed up at action stations or get any aircraft starting to get on deck and aloft. So she went down, I believe, without having launched any aircraft. They also were not necessarily getting off signals particularly well either at this stage. I mean, it's just a mess. Quite what happened with those is a bit difficult to say with the signals, because there were issues about the use of another cruiser that was doing a fairly fast run carrying the Norwegian king, crown prince and cabinet to safety, that did not want to get caught up by surface raiders and was under orders to get back to the UK ASAP rather than stop to do anything. So that one's kind of understandable, but it still sucks. So if you'd had either or both of those ships available, that would have just changed all kinds of everything. So, thoughts, ideas, what do you make of all of these things? What do you think it would have done? Where do you think things would have gone in other directions had other things happened? Yeah, let me know in the comments. I periodically hang out on Dr. Clarke's Discord, things like that. Find me there, look there. Thank you very much.